Good morning. My name is Douglas Robinette. Happy to be here with you today. Taking an online course at Nicholls State University, SATC 220. It's a safety, health, and environmental training as part of their undergraduate program. You first have to understand that a safety program is multifaceted. Training is only one element. You got assessments, you have record retention, all of it makes up for a complete training, comprehensive training program, which is what the course is teaching us. But one element of the comprehensive program is the training itself. So in doing so, what we did was first define a training need. We looked at some OSHA requirements, and we scoped down to a specific, in this case, hand safety, and I'm relating it to well site hand safety in the petroleum industry here in South Louisiana or Texas. And then once you get the training needs defined, you put in the training requirements. How do you communicate the training? In today's exercise, we'll be using PowerPoint, pretty standard, straightforward delivery method. There will be very minimal or no student involvement simply because it's an online PowerPoint presentation. But there are many or other ways to possibly communicate the training. Again, just repeating myself, today is narrowed down and scoped down to just a PowerPoint presentation, which I will narrate through. But after we do training, then we must follow up as well and measure its effectiveness. You know, was the training effective? Did the students comprehend? Was the trainer knowledgeable in what he was trying to communicate? Well, you'll be the judge of that during the next few minutes in the actual PowerPoint presentation training exercise. Look forward to your feedbacks. Thank you very much. Bye. Proper hand protection, well site related activities. I'm Douglas Robinette. This is a spring session, Nicholls State online term, SATC 220 Safety, Health, and Environmental Training. Why are we here today? According to the IADC, 43% of all recordable incidents on drilling rigs are contributed to hand and finger injuries. Further to that, the Bureau of Labor Statistics report that the average hand industry claim now exceeded $6,000, and it actually averages nearly $7,500 per incident. What are our objectives? We have three. Want to stress three basic understanding of the 7 types of hazards and the corresponding protection to be used. Explain how to reduce risk through the use of a job safety analysis. We call this a JSA. And then we'll review the use of a hand protection selection guide. The agenda will be, we will give a quick overview of OSHA 1910.138 as it relates to hand protection. We'll follow that with 7 slides on the 7 types of hazards identified by the OSHA standard. We will then review a JSA, how to properly complete one. Then we'll move on to proper hand protection selection sheet and size chart. And then we'll summarize with a recap of the 7 types of hazards and their corresponding gloves that will be in preparation to help the students in their final quiz. OSHA. OSHA clearly states that employers must train employees on hazards such as skin absorption from harmful substances, severe cuts, lacerations, abrasions, punctures, chemical burns, thermal burns, and harmful temperature extremes. That's what we'll cover today. Moving into those hazard types, skin absorption and harmful substances. We've all seen these types of gloves, commonly referred to as latex gloves. Often relate them to medical industry at the hospital or at the doctor's office. But at well site location, we will often use these gloves when we're using grease or oil and we just don't want it getting on our skin to penetrate. Remember, if it's on your skin, it is in your body. Severe cuts or lacerations. These are very specialized gloves, as you can see. This one's actually a wire mesh type. And you would use these if you were doing some really hazardous work, working with saws, straps, wires, knives. And a good thing to remember, leather is like skin. It will cut. Leather gloves do not make a good protection against severe cuts or lacerations. It could have been so much worse. In researching for this training today, I saw so many much more graphic photos that I chose not to use. Lacerations is no doubt, that and chemical burns and lacerations are no doubt the two most hazardous risks that you could involve yourself in with your hand. So let's talk about the cut resistance. The lacerations, both Europe and the US have standards for how well those gloves should work. The US is ANSI, SEA 105, and Europe uses EN 388. You can study this more after the class at your own leisure. I just wanted to highlight the fact that both Europe and US do actually have standards for how effective those cut level protection should be. Moving on to the next type of glove, our hand protection is severe abrasions. We say that a lot in almost all aspects of our lives, whether we're doing home maintenance, landscaping, in the oil and gas industry as well. The long standard by far has been leather gloves. We've all seen them. Probably everyone has used them, and they do work well in an abrasive environment. More recently, we've seen these new types of gloves typically called high impact gloves. High impact gloves will reduce abrasions and they will reduce some impact. But don't be confused, just because they are extra padded in areas, they will not prevent severe hand damage if the impact exceeds what your hand can actually take. I know of no industry standard that actually measures these new types of gloves on impact resistance. So just think about it, good glove to use, but I wouldn't trust them too much past just used for severe abrasions. Here's a classic example. Either one of these gloves would have done a great job for preventing this type of incident. Punctures, specialized gloves, metal shavings, medical waste, screwdrivers, wire rope, fencing. Here's two examples of gloves that would prevent punctures. And here's a classic example. Even this incident is not an excuse for late homework. Chemical burns. Behind lacerations, this is probably the second most important, if not the most important type of glove to use and to ensure that you pick the right selection. In the industry that we're in, we might use these gloves with dealing with caustic soda, bleach, paint thinners, solvents, or poisons. There's a wide range of gloves, and you'll see in the review pictures there's a bit better selection of gloves, but there's a wide range of gloves types to be used depending upon the chemical. I did not list it in this presentation as the list was simply too long. You can see this chemical burn, definitely going to leave a mark for a long time. It could have been so much worse. You really do need to focus on using the right glove when using the chemicals. Thermal burns. We think of thermal burns being from heat, but it can be from either heat or cold. We relate this to using a cutting torch, welding, high temperature welds, even handling dry ice. You'll see the next slide actually talks about extreme temperatures. If you think about thermal burn gloves and extreme temperature gloves, they both have probably a similar thermal equivalent, but you'll see the thermal burn gloves typically have a better wear surface, like just more durable for actually touching something hot. You'll see on the next slide it's more related to just like cold weather, for instance. So, dang, that was hot. All he would have needed to protect his hand from this injury was the correct glove to be used, or if he had done the correct risk assessment prior to touching the part, he could have prevented this accident from happening. The last of the 7 types of gloves are temperature extremes. As I spoke earlier, very similar thermal rating to what we saw on the previous slide, but this one just has a less durable contact surface. So you might use a hot work, primarily weather conditions, if chemical frostbite, if you're handling with propane, ammonia, dry ice, possibly some cold storage. Take this blacksmith for instance. He's made a good choice in using hand protection. Could you imagine doing this type of job without some type of hand protection in place? So let's move on. Let's look at the JSA that I spoke of earlier, Job Safety Analysis. I pulled this random JSA. It's a typical of a well site type intervention. It has 5 primary sections: type of job, PPE requirements, special needs, team discussion, document risk, and risk mitigation. Let's move into the top section. So here we're defining the type of work to be performed. This is pre-checks, have you visited the work site, have you completed the pre-job planning, is there a written release procedure, etc. And the JSA requirements. You walk through, you get your team, and you identify risk, and you do a risk assessment. And you'll see more on that in the next section of the JSA. So we've done our job safety analysis form, type of job. We moved into the type of PPE required: safety glasses, goggles, hard hat, gloves. We have not yet identified the type of glove, but it is a firm requirement in your PPE. And then other selections that you would identify as you're doing your JSA. Are there special needs for this type of job? Should you use whip checks, rigging, forklifts, torque table, emergency response plan? These are all things for the group, and this is where when you do the JSA, it needs to be everyone involved in the job as a group, reviewing the job and verbally discussing all of the steps. Once you identify the hazards to be encountered during the job, you want to eliminate if possible, substitute if possible. Maybe if you can't eliminate it, use something else as a workaround. Can you engineer out the hazard? Can you build a new tool, build the part just a little bit different? Are there administrative controls that you possibly could implement? And then make sure that you have the correct PPE. Once you identify the risk and you've discussed them and everyone's agreed, you break down the task sequentially. You identify the hazards and the risk, you document it. Then you document your risk mitigation. What are you going to do to mitigate that risk? Say if you're working at height, you're going to use a man lift, and the man lift's got to have a harness for height. As an example, you want to document the hazards, and then you want to assign responsibility for that specific hazard to a specific person. That way there's no ambiguity into who's going to be responsible to mitigate the risk. Moving into the hand protection selection. It's very straightforward. You can modify this to fit your specific needs if it's different. Here we've identified the work activities: welding, grinding, cutting. What exposure will we have? Extreme heat, extreme cold. We talked about those types of gloves to prevent that thermal exchange. And then we get into, can the hazard be eliminated without use of PPE? Yes or no? If no, what type of glove? These are the 7 types of gloves that we've gone over previously in our presentation. And so you make a good decision, pick the correct glove, and then make sure that the glove that you pick fits correctly. Here's a sample sizing chart. It measures the circumference of your hand. There's others that measures the length of your hand. Thank you, Leather Gloves Online. This is where I pulled this measurement chart from. Very simple, straightforward, but you do need to have gloves that fit properly to ensure proper hand safety. Let's review the 7 types of gloves real quickly. We have skin absorption and harmful substances. These are not to be confused with chemical burns. These are lightweight gloves for lightweight type liquids. We have severe cuts and laceration gloves, wire mesh. As you can see, the guy here with a sharp knife handling a piece of glass, possibly a box cutter. Severe abrasions. A lot of different gloves will help out. The old type leather and cloth gloves, the leather gloves, the newer style impact gloves. A lot of different types will help out in this environment. Punctures. They can be very specialized if you in the industry, or they can be generalized if it's just hazardous working conditions that you're working in. But they do make puncture resistance gloves, and if you need them, ensure that you have them. Chemical burns. Extensive range of glove types for use when handling chemicals. So you need to first identify the chemical, And that chemical will then lead you to the correct type of glove for the application that you're working in. Behind lacerations or equal to lacerations, I cannot stress the need for chemical burn protection on hand glove safety. Then we get into thermal burns. So we talked earlier, we talked about the working surfaces of a thermal glove typically is a little bit more robust than just your heat exchange. These new silicone type gloves shown at the bottom, very popular, very effective. And then the harmful temperature extremes we talked about. Just good insulated gloves, whether it be for ice, for cold. Not as durable as the heat gloves on the previous slide, but still good heat thermal protection. Questions? If not, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to feedback to the email or to my website. Thank you very much.